The eviction notice was taped to my front door at exactly 6:12 a.m. The paper was still damp from the morning fog, curling at the edges like it didn't even want to be there. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Wrong address, wrong house, wrong person, because the words printed in bold black letters didn't just threaten my home. They threatened the life I'd spent 10 years building. Vacate within 30 days. Property ownership dispute filed by the HOA. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. The silence of the neighborhood suddenly felt louder than traffic. Lawns perfectly trimmed, mailboxes aligned like soldiers. The kind of place people move to for peace, safety, stability. And yet, here I was being told to leave. I stepped back inside slowly, like the house might disappear behind me if I moved too fast. Every corner held memories. Late-night takeout on the kitchen floor before furniture arrived. The faint scratch on the wall from when my nephew tried to park his toy truck indoors. The window where I watched storms roll in every summer. This wasn't just property. This was home. The letter claimed the Homeowners Association had discovered irregularities in the property title, and that legal action was already underway. According to them, I wasn't the rightful owner anymore. Imagine waking up one morning and being told your house isn't yours. My phone buzzed with a notification before I could even process the shock. An email from the HOA's legal department. Polite, cold, formal. They suggested I contact their attorneys to discuss relocation options. Relocation options. As if I were a tenant. As if I had ever rented this place. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the document spread out in front of me. My hands weren't shaking yet. That part comes later, when reality starts sinking in. At that moment, I just felt confused, because there was one detail the HOA didn't know, one detail that turned this entire situation from stressful to unbelievable. They thought they were dealing with a homeowner who didn't understand property law. They thought they could scare me into leaving quietly. They thought they had the paperwork advantage. What they didn't know was that the company that handled the title, the deed, and the legal ownership record for this house was mine. And suddenly, the eviction notice on my door wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the beginning of a very big mistake. I didn't panic right away. That surprised me. Most people imagine a moment like this turning into chaos. Frantic phone calls, raised voices, worst-case scenarios racing through your mind. But the truth is, shock is quiet. It sits with you. It makes the world feel slightly off balance, like a picture frame hanging crooked on the wall that nobody else seems to notice. I kept staring at the eviction notice, rereading the phrase property ownership dispute. It sounded official, legal, heavy, the kind of wording designed to make people feel small and powerless. But confusion slowly turned into something else, a slow, creeping disbelief. Because this house wasn't some rushed purchase or risky investment. I didn't stumble into home ownership by accident. The entire process had been careful, deliberate, documented down to the smallest detail. I knew every signature on that closing file, every stamp, every transfer of ownership. I knew them because I was there for all of it. Years earlier, long before I ever moved into this neighborhood, I had started working in real estate closings. At first, it was just a job. Paperwork, deadlines, long hours spent reviewing documents most people never read. But over time, something shifted. I started to understand how fragile property ownership could be if the details weren't handled correctly. A missing document, a delayed filing, a clerical error buried deep in county records. Small mistakes that could create massive problems years later. I saw too many families blindsided by disputes they never saw coming. That's what pushed me to start my own title company. A small operation at first. Just a few desks, a printer that jammed every other day, and a coffee machine that sounded like it was preparing for takeoff. But slowly, client by client, closing by closing, it grew into something stable. Something trustworthy. Something built on precision. I made it my mission to make sure homeowners never had to question whether their house was truly theirs. And when I finally bought this home, I treated the purchase like my most important closing ever. Because it was. I remember signing the final documents. The feeling of relief when the deed transferred cleanly. The confirmation emails. The recorded title. the quiet satisfaction of knowing everything had been done the right way. That memory kept replaying in my head as the morning sunlight crept across the kitchen floor. If the HOA was claiming there was a title issue, then something had changed after the purchase. And that thought made my stomach tighten. HOAs don't just wake up one day and start eviction proceedings without paperwork. There had to be filings, claims, legal notices. Someone had started a process, and they believed they had the authority to do it, which meant someone, somewhere, thought they had a stronger claim to my house than I did. I opened my laptop and logged into the county property records system. My fingers moved automatically, muscle memory from years of searching titles and verifying ownership. Parcel number, address, legal description. Click. The page loaded slowly, as if it knew I wasn't ready to see what came next. Everything looked normal at first. My name, purchase date, recorded deed, the same information that had always been there. Then I scrolled, and that's when I saw it. A recent filing, dated just 3 weeks earlier. A document I had never seen before. My heartbeat finally caught up with the situation, thudding loudly in my ears as I opened the record. Because filings like this don't just appear out of nowhere. Someone had submitted it. Someone had signed it. Someone had convinced the system it belonged there. The HOA hadn't just sent an eviction notice. They believed they had proof. And for the first time that morning, the quiet shock started turning into something sharper. Someone wasn't just making a mistake. Someone was rewriting the story of who owned my home. I stared at the filing for a long time before opening it. Not because I didn't want to know what it said, but because a part of me already understood what it meant. Filings don't just show up in property records by accident. They appear because someone paid to put them there. Someone signed their name. Someone stood in front of a notary and swore the document was legitimate, which meant this wasn't a typo. It was intentional. When the document finally opened, the language felt strangely familiar. Legal phrasing, formal tone, carefully structured paragraphs designed to sound confident and authoritative. The kind of document meant to intimidate before anyone even questioned it. It claimed the HOA had obtained corrective title documentation, proving a portion of my property had been improperly transferred during the original sale. According to this filing, the land my house sat on was actually part of a shared community parcel. Shared community parcel. The words felt surreal. My house wasn't on the edge of the neighborhood or near common grounds. It wasn't bordering a park or a clubhouse. It was a standard lot, surrounded by other homes just like it. Except now, on paper, it wasn't. My phone rang before I could even finish reading. The HOA president's name flashed across the screen. I had met him a few times at neighborhood meetings, the kind of person who smiled often, but never long enough to feel warm. He spoke like every sentence had been rehearsed beforehand. I let the phone ring twice before answering. His voice was calm. Too calm. He spoke like someone delivering news he believed was already settled. He explained that the association had recently conducted a title audit of neighborhood properties. During this audit, they had discovered discrepancies affecting several parcels, mine included. He assured me they weren't trying to cause stress, only to correct historical mistakes. Historical mistakes that somehow required me to leave my house. I asked him where the new documentation came from. There was a pause, just a second too long. Then he mentioned an outside consulting firm that had helped the HOA clean up outdated records. He spoke in general terms, avoiding specifics, steering the conversation toward relocation assistance and timelines. He never asked if the filing was correct. He spoke as if it already was. After the call ended, the kitchen felt smaller, like the walls had moved an inch closer without warning. I printed the filing and spread the pages across the table. The more I read, the more unsettling the details became. The legal description of the land had been rewritten subtly, carefully, just enough changes to make it look legitimate if you didn't compare it to older records side by side. Most homeowners would never notice, but I wasn't most homeowners. Still, something didn't sit right. If the HOA believed this filing was legitimate, they must have received some kind of professional assurance. No board approves eviction action without legal confidence, which meant someone, a surveyor, a consultant, a legal team, had backed this claim. And that's when the first real doubt crept in. Not doubt about the documents, doubt about people. because I had seen situations like this before. Disputes that started small and snowballed because nobody wanted to admit they were wrong. Organizations protecting reputations. Professionals doubling down to avoid embarrassment. Situations where truth became less important than saving face. And HOAs, once they started legal processes, rarely backed down easily. A memory surfaced from years earlier, a closing that almost fell apart because a developer refused to admit a boundary mistake. Weeks of delays. Lawyers circling each other with carefully worded emails. Thousands of dollars spent just to correct a few lines of text. People don't like admitting errors, especially when those errors cost money. My laptop chimed with a new email notification. This time, it wasn't from the HOA. It was from one of my employees. Subject line, "We need to talk about a recent filing." My chest tightened as I opened the message. She had recognized the document number from the county system. She asked if I had authorized a file review request that came through the office 2 weeks earlier. I hadn't. According to her, someone had contacted the company asking for archived documents related to my property purchase. They claimed they were assisting with a historical title correction. The request had looked legitimate, routine even, so the file had been released. The room went completely silent, because suddenly, this wasn't just a dispute with the HOA anymore. Someone had used my own company's records to build the case against me. And the worst part, they had done it without anyone realizing what was really happening. I read the email 3 times, then once more out loud, as if hearing the words might change them. Someone had requested my property file. My team had released it, and now the HOA had a corrective title document. The connection felt too clean, too perfect, like puzzle pieces sliding into place in a way that made my chest tighten instead of relax. I called the office immediately. My employee sounded nervous before I even spoke. She kept apologizing, even though I hadn't blamed her. The request had come through the same channel attorneys and lenders used every week. Proper form, professional language, a signature block from a consulting firm. Nothing about it had raised red flags. Until now. I asked her to forward everything. Emails, attachments, caller logs, any notes from the interaction. Her keyboard clattered in the background while she gathered the files. I could hear the unease in every keystroke. When the email arrived, my inbox felt heavier just looking at it. The consulting firm had a polished name, a professional logo, a full signature with phone numbers and disclaimers. On the surface, it looked exactly like hundreds of legitimate requests we handled every year. But something fell off. Not wrong enough to scream fraud, just wrong enough to whisper it. I dialed the phone number listed in the signature. The line rang once, twice. Then an automated message picked up. This number is no longer in service. The silence after the recording ended felt louder than the message itself. I searched the firm online. A website appeared instantly, sleek, modern, filled with industry buzzwords. Title correction specialists. Property record audits. The language was carefully crafted to sound authoritative without saying anything specific. No client testimonials. No staff photos. No physical office address. Just a contact form. A knot formed in my stomach. I clicked through page after page, hoping to find something real. Something verifiable. But every section fell hollow, like a stage set designed to look solid from a distance. Someone had built a professional-looking ghost, and my company had trusted it. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from a neighbor. "Hey, did you hear about the board meeting tonight?" Board meeting. Of course there was a board meeting. I hadn't received an invitation. Not an email. Not a letter. Not even a courtesy notice. The HOA was discussing my property without me in the room. I grabbed my keys before my brain could talk me out of it. The community clubhouse lights were already on when I arrived. Through the windows, I could see silhouettes moving inside. People seated in rows, heads turning toward the front of the room. A projector screen glowing against the far wall. The meeting had started. I hesitated at the door, just for a moment. This was the point where things changed, where speculation turned into confrontation, where polite emails turned into real voices in real rooms. I pushed the door open. Every conversation stopped. You could feel the shift ripple through the room. Whispered side comments died mid-sentence. Chairs creaked as people turned to look at me. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity. A few looked uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be involved but couldn't look away. At the front of the room, the HOA president froze beside the projector screen, and on that screen was a map of my property, highlighted in red. He recovered quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He welcomed me in the same polite tone he used on phone calls, but the warmth felt rehearsed. Careful, measured. He said they were just discussing ongoing community adjustments. Adjustments. I asked if those adjustments included evicting homeowners. The room shifted again. A ripple of murmurs. Someone cleared their throat. Papers shuffled nervously. The president began explaining the title correction project, the consulting firm, the historical discrepancies, the need to protect community land. Every sentence sounded more confident than the last, like he believed the story completely, or needed everyone else to believe it. Then he clicked to the next slide. A scanned document appeared on the screen. My original purchase file. My company's logo at the top. My signature at the bottom. Except something wasn't right. A paragraph had been added, slipped into the legal description like it had always been there. Subtle. Technical. Easy to miss unless you knew the original by heart. But I knew it. I knew every line of it. And the realization hit me all at once. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't just a careless mistake. Someone had altered a legal document from my own company's records, and now they were presenting it as proof in front of the entire neighborhood. I took a step toward the screen. My voice fell steadier than I expected when I spoke. Where did you get that version of the file? The HOA president didn't answer right away. He looked at the room, at the board members, then back at me. And for the first time since this started, he looked unsure. The room stayed quiet long enough for everyone to feel it. The HOA president adjusted his papers, buying time. He repeated the name of the consulting firm, said they had verified everything, said the board had relied on professional guidance. His voice sounded practiced again, but the pause before it had already done the damage. Doubt had entered the room, and once it shows up, it doesn't leave easily. I stepped closer to the projector screen. That paragraph wasn't in the original closing file, I said. It didn't exist when the deed was recorded. The words landed heavier than I expected. People shifted in their chairs. Someone whispered, "What does that mean?" from the back row. The president opened his mouth to respond, but another voice spoke first. One of the board members stood up. She was new, quiet at meetings, the kind of person who usually nodded more than she spoke. I'd only exchanged small talk with her once while collecting mail. Tonight, she didn't look quiet at all. She looked conflicted. "I think we need to slow down," she said, glancing at the rest of the board. "We never saw the original file. We only saw what the consultants sent us." The room tilted again. "Only saw what the consultants sent us." The president stiffened beside the projector. The board voted unanimously based on the information provided. Her voice softened, but she didn't sit down. Not unanimously. I abstained. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room like wind through leaves. The president's jaw tightened. He tried to redirect the conversation back to procedure, policy, process. But the shift had already happened. The conversation wasn't about policy anymore. It was about trust. And trust was cracking. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Once. Twice. 3 times in a row. I ignored it first, but the vibration kept returning like a heartbeat I couldn't shut off. When I finally checked the screen, my stomach dropped. 3 missed calls from my office. 1 new voicemail. I stepped into the hallway to listen. My employee's voice was breathless, rushed, trying to stay calm and failing. "You need to call me back right now. The county records office just contacted us. There's another filing tied to your property. It was submitted this afternoon." Another filing. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow, too quiet. The sounds of the meeting behind the door faded into a dull blur. I pulled up the county system again with shaking hands. Parcel number, address, search, refresh. There it was, filed just hours earlier. Not a small one, not a routine one. A massive claim tied to development planning and land recovery costs. The amount made my chest tighten. Someone wasn't just trying to move me out anymore. Someone was building a financial case to take everything. I walked back into the meeting slowly. The board was still arguing. Voices layered over each other. Questions bouncing without answers. I interrupted them. "There's a new lien on my property," I said. The room went silent again, but this silence felt different. Heavier. More dangerous. The president blinked. "That's not possible. It was filed today." He shook his head instinctively, like rejecting the idea could make it disappear. But I could see the uncertainty creeping in again, the cracks widening. Then someone in the back spoke up. An older man, longtime resident, retired contractor, the kind of neighbor who noticed everything happening on the street. "I saw survey flags in your yard last week," he said slowly. "Thought you were planning a renovation." My pulse thudded in my ears. Survey flags, development planning, land recovery costs. The pieces snapped together in a way that made my stomach drop. This wasn't about correcting records. This wasn't about historical mistakes. Someone wasn't trying to fix the neighborhood. They were trying to change it. And suddenly, the eviction notice, the altered document, the fake consulting firm, the new lien, they all pointed in the same direction. Redevelopment. My house wasn't the target. My land was. I looked back at the projector screen, at the red outline around my property glowing against the map. Except now, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The red outline didn't stop at my lot. It stretched across multiple properties, forming a single, continuous block. The red outline stayed on the screen while the room tried to process what it meant. A single block of land, multiple homes, one continuous shape. My house wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the first domino. I stepped closer to the projector, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel in my throat. "Zoom out," I said. The HOA president hesitated, but the room had already shifted out of his control. Every eye was on the screen now. Someone from the back walked up and tapped the laptop. The map zoomed out. Gasps spread through the room. The highlighted area stretched across the center of the neighborhood, a perfect rectangle carved out of the community like a missing tooth. My home sat directly in the middle. Prime land, main road access, large continuous parcel potential, the kind of land developers dream about. Everything suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. The title audit, the fake consulting firm, the altered document, the lien, the urgency. They weren't correcting the past. They were clearing the future. Voices erupted around the room, but they blurred into background noise. My focus locked onto one thing. The document still displayed on the screen. My altered closing file. My company's logo at the top. My signature at the bottom. My signature. I stepped right up to the projection until the light washed over my hands. "That's not my signature," I said quietly. The room fell silent again. At first, people looked confused. The signature looked real. It matched the style, the shape, the flow of the letters. Anyone glancing quickly would accept it without question. But I didn't glance. I knew every detail of how I signed legal documents. Years of repetition had turned it into muscle memory. The curve on the final letter, the spacing between my initials, the pressure pattern that always faded at the end. This signature didn't fade. It stopped. Perfectly. Digitally. I turned to face the room. This isn't a modified document. It's a forged one. The word forged echoed through the silence like it had weight. The HOA president looked like the floor had disappeared beneath him. Board members exchanged stunned looks. Neighbors whispered in disbelief. And then the quiet board member, the one who had abstained, spoke again. "Who hired the consulting firm?" Every head turned back to the front of the room. The president swallowed. His voice came out thinner this time. "They were recommended by our legal advisor." "Which one?" someone asked. Another pause. Longer this time. He said the name slowly, like he already knew how it would sound out loud. "Our former HOA attorney." Former. The word landed like a dropped glass. Because suddenly, the timeline snapped into place. The consulting firm request. The file release. The altered documents. The lien filed just hours earlier. All moving forward even after the attorney had left. He hadn't walked away. He had started something before he did. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the office. This one short. County records flagged the lien. Under investigation. Possible fraud. The room erupted. Conversations collided. Questions stacked faster than answers. The president sank into a chair, pale and stunned. The board member beside him covered her mouth. Neighbors who had arrived expecting routine updates now stood in a room unraveling a scheme in real time. I looked back at the red map one last time. The fear that had lived in my chest all week finally loosened its grip. Not completely, not instantly, but enough to breathe again. The eviction wasn't happening. The lien wouldn't stand. The documents are already collapsing under scrutiny. The dominoes have fallen, just not in the direction anyone expected. But as the noise in the room grew louder, one quiet realization settled over me like a shadow. This plan had been massive, coordinated, expensive, and people don't attempt something this big unless they believe it will work. Which meant the most unsettling truth of all was only now becoming clear. This wasn't a random scam. It was a plan that had almost succeeded. The weeks that followed felt quieter than the storm that started everything. Not peaceful at first, just quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after chaos, when the dust is still settling and nobody is quite sure what the landscape looks like yet. Investigators moved quickly once the forged documents were flagged. The fake consulting firm disappeared almost overnight. Their website went offline. Phone numbers disconnected. Emails bounced back. It was like watching a stage set get dismantled piece by piece, revealing the empty space behind it. The former HOA attorney didn't disappear so easily. As more records surfaced, the timeline became painfully clear. He had quietly approached the board months earlier with the idea of a title audit to correct supposed historical errors. He positioned himself as the expert who could help the community unlock hidden value in shared land. At first, it sounded harmless, responsible even, protecting the neighborhood's long-term interests. Then the consulting firm appeared, then the document requests, then the altered filings. By the time he officially stepped down as the HOA's legal advisor, the plan was already in motion, designed to continue without him at the center. If the land consolidation succeeded, a developer would step in. Homes in a highlighted block would be bought, cleared, and replaced with a new project. The neighborhood would gain new amenities. Property values would rise. At least, that was the promise. The reality would have been families forced out of homes they thought were secure. The lien was removed within days. The county corrected the record and flagged the forged filing. My original deed remained untouched, exactly as it had been the day I signed it. The eviction notice was quietly withdrawn, replaced with a carefully worded apology from the HOA board. The president knocked on my door one evening, holding the letter like it weighed more than paper should. He looked different without the meeting room and projector lights, smaller somehow. Tired. Human. He admitted they had trusted the wrong person, that they had believed they were protecting the neighborhood, that they never imagined the documents were manipulated. And for the first time since this began, I believed him. Because fear doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like people trying to do the right thing and not realizing they're being guided in the wrong direction. The quiet board member visited a few days later. She brought homemade cookies and a nervous smile. She said she kept thinking about the night I walked into the meeting, how confident the presentation looked until the questions started, how easily the story shifted once someone said, "Wait." She told me she almost stayed silent that night. Almost. And that word stayed with me long after she left. Almost. I returned to work the following Monday, stepping back into the office that had unknowingly played a role in the mess. The same printer still jammed. The same coffee machine still sounded like it was preparing for takeoff. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. Because this time, I understood something differently. Paperwork isn't just paperwork. Documents aren't just documents. And homeownership isn't just a signature on a page. It's vigilance, questions, verification, the willingness to slow down when something feels even slightly off. The neighborhood eventually moved on. Lawns stayed trimmed. Mailboxes stayed aligned. New conversations replaced the old ones. But every time I passed the clubhouse, I remember that night. The red outline on the screen, the silence in the room, the moment the story changed direction. It could have ended very differently. And that's the part that stays with me most. Because the biggest danger wasn't the forged document or the fake consulting firm. It was how close the plan came to working simply because nobody questioned it soon enough. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this: ownership isn't just about having the keys. It's about knowing the story behind the locks. So check your records. Ask questions. Pay attention to the details that seem too small to matter. Because sometimes the difference between losing your home and protecting it comes down to one simple moment when someone decides to say, wait, something isn't right. If this story made you think, share it with someone who believes their paperwork is probably fine. You never know who might need the reminder.